Zuri Malika had imagined the Camway compound to be beautiful, but nothing prepared her for how massive it really was. The tall gates of Mavoko Hills opened slowly as she stepped out of the taxi, gripping her worn suitcase with both hands. She was only 22, nervous but hopeful. This job was supposed to change everything, help her pay for her grandmother's medicine, maybe even save a little for school one day. She breathed in deeply, telling herself that hard work would finally be enough. But the moment she walked inside the mansion, reality hit her like a slap. Nyasha and Kilo, the Camway daughters, stood at the top of the marble staircase, arms crossed, eyes running over her like she was something they'd scraped off their shoes. Zuri smiled politely, whispering a soft hello, but they didn't bother replying. Instead, they exchanged a look and burst into laughter. "That's the new girl," Nyasha said loudly. "She looks like she walked here from the village," Kilo added, wrinkling her nose. Zuri felt her cheeks burn, but she kept quiet. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry on her first day. As she followed the house manager through the grand hallways, chandeliers glittering overhead, floors polished like mirrors, she could still hear the sisters' whispers behind her. "She better know how to work. I hope she doesn't break anything. She doesn't look smart enough to even clean." Each word sank deeper into her chest, stealing the excitement she had carried all the way from her small town. She had thought coming here would bring her dignity and a fresh start. Instead, it felt like she had stepped into a place where she didn't belong, where everything about her, her clothes, her accent, even her silence, made them look down on her. Still, Zuri lifted her chin. She didn't come here to impress them. She came here to survive. And she promised herself quietly, "One day, they'll regret treating me like this." Zuri's first morning at the Camway compound started before the sun had even risen. The rooster's crow hadn't even echoed through Mavoko Hills when the house manager appeared at her door with a mop, a bucket, and a long list of chores. "Start with the floors," he said, barely looking at her. Zuri nodded, trying to hide the lump in her throat, and got to work. The tiles were cold under her hands, and the water turned gray within minutes as she scrubbed, her muscles aching before the day had even begun. As she bent over the floors, she could hear the giggles coming from Nyasha and Kilo. They leaned against the staircase railing, whispering loudly enough for her to hear. "Look at her," Nyasha said. "Does she even own more than one dress?" Kilo laughed. "I bet she doesn't even know how to use a washing machine properly. She's just a village girl." Zuri's chest tightened. She had grown up in a small town, yes, but she had dreams, she had skills. She had a mind that worked just as hard as anyone else's. She wanted to shout back, to tell them they had no right to judge her, but she swallowed her tears. Not now. She had to survive today. She had to survive this. Her breakfast, the one small plate of sad porridge she had carefully set aside, was gone when she returned to the kitchen. She found Nyasha smirking, her spoon sticky from stealing Zuri's food. "Oops," she said. "I guess you'll just have to wait until lunch, village girl." Every insult, every stolen bite, every mocking glance felt like a weight pressing down on her. She felt exhausted, humiliated, and completely alone. The other staff averted their eyes, pretending not to notice. Zuri wanted to run, to escape, to scream, but she reminded herself why she was here. Her grandmother needed her. Her dreams weren't disposable, so she kept scrubbing. She kept working. She kept her head down. By mid-morning, her hands were raw, her knees sore, and the house still glittered with the polished floors of her hard labor. Zuri paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from her brow, and whispered to herself, "I need this. Can do this. I will make this worth it." Even in that small, quiet promise, there was a spark of fire that the Camway sisters hadn't seen yet. A fire that no insult, no cruelty, and no stolen breakfast could ever put out. The evening air in the Camway compound felt heavier than usual. Zuri was finishing up the last of her chores, her arms sore from hours of cleaning, when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her pause. She had learned by now that Nyasha and Kilo would make a big show of every arrival, and tonight, she guessed, was no different. But when the front doors swung open, the house seemed to change. A tall, confident figure stepped inside, dressed in a sharp suit, his graduation cap tucked under his arm. Jabari Kamwe, the eldest son, had returned from Johannesburg. The chatter of the house stopped for a moment, the air thick with curiosity and anticipation. Nyasha and Kilo whispered excitedly to each other, rolling their eyes and pretending not to care. Then he noticed her. "Hello," Jabari said, his voice calm and warm as he looked directly at Zuri. "You must be Zuri." "Jabari. Welcome home." Zuri froze. Her hands, still damp from wiping counters, hovered in the air. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that, with respect, with genuine politeness, without a trace of mockery. She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Thank you, sir," she managed to whisper, her cheeks flushing with surprise and a little disbelief. Nyasha's jaw dropped. Kilo's smirk faltered. They exchanged a look that screamed, "Wait, he actually talked to her." Jabari gave her a small nod, as if it were completely normal. "I heard you've been keeping things running here," he said casually, glancing around the sparkling hallways she had worked tirelessly to clean. "I appreciate it." Zuri felt her heart lift, even though a part of her still expected him to say something cruel, like everyone else did. This was different. This was real acknowledgement. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone in this house could see her not as a village girl or a servant, but as a person with value. The room seemed to buzz with tension. The sisters whispered behind their hands, muttering insults under their breath, but their words had no power against Jabari's presence. He moved with an ease and kindness that made the sisters' cruelty feel small and petty. Zuri kept her gaze on him, unsure how to respond, but something inside her stirred, a mixture of hope, disbelief, and cautious excitement. For the first time in a long time, she felt a little less invisible. As Jabari walked further into the mansion, greeting his parents and younger siblings, Zuri wiped her palms on her apron, trying to steady herself. She had no idea what this change would bring, but one thing was clear. Tonight was different. Something had shifted, and for the first time since she arrived, Zuri felt like maybe her life at the Kamwe compound wasn't just about surviving, maybe it was about being noticed in the right way by the right person. Later that evening, after the mansion had quieted down and the soft glow of lamps filled the halls, Zuri slipped into the small storage room the house manager had assigned her. It was nothing more than a cramped space with a single chair and a dusty shelf, but it was hers, the only place in the house where she could breathe. She pulled out her old, cracked phone and opened the folder she had saved months of tutorials in. Tonight, she was going to study software design, her one secret escape from the life of chores and insults. She tapped through the videos, her fingers moving fast, eyes scanning lines of code on a screen that seemed impossibly tiny. Her mind raced as she practiced small programs and tried out new ideas, imagining a future where she could build apps that mattered, apps that could help people like her grandmother and even small artisans in rural towns. Unnoticed, Jabari had come to check on the house before calling it a night. He paused outside the door, curious when he heard soft typing and low muttering. Pushing the door open quietly, he saw Zuri huddled over her phone, entirely absorbed in her screen. "What are you doing?" he asked softly, careful not to startle her. Zuri jumped, nearly dropping the phone. Her face turned bright red. "Oh, nothing. Just some tutorials," she stammered, fumbling for words. Jabari crouched slightly to get a better look. "Software tutorials?" he asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "You know how to code?" Zuri hesitated, embarrassed. She had never told anyone about her studies. The Kamwe family, she thought, would never take a maid seriously. I've been learning on my own," she admitted softly. "Just trying to build something for the future." Jabari's eyes lit up. He was genuinely impressed, not with a hint of condescension, only admiration. "This is amazing," he said. "Most people here would never guess, and they would probably never give you the chance. But you're talented." Zuri looked down at her phone, feeling a strange mix of pride and shame. She had worked so hard in secret, and yet she felt like she shouldn't even be proud because of who she was in their eyes. But Jabari's smile, kind and encouraging, made her heart lift. For the first time, she felt like someone actually saw her abilities, not just the dirt under her nails or the uniform on her back. "You've got real potential," Jabari continued. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for this. Ever." Zuri nodded, her chest tight with emotion. She had never imagined a Kamway family member could treat her this way. She blushed again, this time with a quiet pride, realizing that maybe her dreams weren't so impossible after all. And for the first time since she arrived, she felt seen, not as a servant, not as a village girl, but as someone who could actually change her own life. That night, as she returned the phone to her pocket and stood to leave, Zuri felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. The Kamway compound hadn't changed yet, but maybe, just maybe, she was starting to. The next morning, Zuri woke before dawn as usual, carrying the weight of chores that seemed heavier than the day before. She had barely finished sweeping the grand hallways when she noticed Nyasha and Kilo exchanging glances that made her stomach twist. There was something different in the air, a tension she hadn't seen before. It didn't take long for her to realize why. Ever since Jabari had spoken to her politely and complimented her skills, the sisters had started watching her differently. Not with mockery this time, but with something sharper, envy. "Look at her," Nyasha hissed, leaning against the staircase railing. "Why is Jabari even talking to the helper? He's smiling at her," Kilo added, eyes narrowed. "It's not fair. She's supposed to be invisible." From that moment their cruelty changed. It became calculated. They gave her impossible tasks, scrubbing the floors again, but now adding windows, silverware polishing, and dusting every shelf in the mansion, all before breakfast. They timed her, shouted when she moved too slowly, and smirked whenever her hands trembled with exhaustion. When Zuri tried to rest for a moment, they would hide her food. Sometimes they would lock the kitchen cabinets and laugh as she banged on the doors, her stomach growling. Other times they would take her small pay envelope and claim she had done something wrong to forfeit it. Every day became a battle, not just against the chores, but against their constant attempts to break her spirit. Zuri felt the sting of humiliation, and for a moment doubt crept in. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe the job was too hard, the family too cruel. But then she thought of her grandmother waiting at home, of the medicine bills, of the little dreams she was determined to protect. She swallowed her tears and kept moving, silently telling herself, "I won't give them the satisfaction. Can't quit. Can't." The sisters, noticing she wasn't breaking, grew angrier. Their insults grew sharper, their sneers colder, but nothing they did could erase the quiet determination Zuri carried inside. She began to realize something important. The harder they tried to push her down, the stronger she became. By the end of the day, when the mansion was quiet and the sun dipped behind Mavoko Hills, Zuri's body ached, her hands were raw, and her uniform was streaked with dirt. Yet inside, a small fire burned brighter than ever. Nyasha and Kilo might have had wealth, titles, and family power, but Zuri had something they could never take, her will. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. That evening, the Kamway mansion was buzzing with guests. Friends, business partners, and relatives gathered for a small celebration. Zuri moved quietly between the tables, carrying drinks and clearing plates, trying not to draw attention. But Nyasha and Kilo had other plans. They whispered loudly, making sure everyone could hear, laughing at every little mistake she made. "You dropped the tray again," Nyasha sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. "Honestly, how do they even let someone like you work here?" Kilo chimed in, loud enough for the guests to hear. "Look at her hands. So clumsy. She really is just a village girl." Zuri felt her face burn with humiliation. She kept her head down, swallowed the tears that threatened to spill, and carried on. Every insult felt like a slap, every giggle from the sisters like a weight pressing her down. She had never felt so small in her life. But then she heard a calm, commanding voice cut through the laughter. "Enough." Zuri froze. All eyes turned toward the doorway. Jabari stood there, tall and serious, his suit impeccable, but his eyes fierce. The room went silent. The sisters blinked, caught off guard, and the guests murmured in surprise. "Step back," Jabari said, his gaze fixed on Nyasha and Kilo. "This stops now." They stammered, trying to argue, but he held up a hand. "No more humiliation. No more shouting at her in front of guests. She is not here for your amusement." Zuri felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since arriving, someone had stood up for her. Someone she trusted, someone who believed in her dignity. She blinked back tears, barely daring to breathe. Jabari's voice softened but stayed firm. "If she leaves this house," he said, looking each of his sisters in the eye, "then I leave with her. Understand?" Nyasha and Kilo's mouths opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, their cruelty had met a wall. Zuri's heart pounded, not with fear but with hope. She realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to bear everything alone. Jabari stepped closer to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't deserve this," he said quietly, "just for her. Never forget that." Zuri nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had dreamed of someone noticing her struggles, but she had never imagined it would feel like this, like the first real breath of freedom after years of being trapped. That night, she understood something important. Someone could see her worth, and that someone could change everything. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't invisible anymore. A few days later, Zuri found herself alone in the study room, her old phone in her hands. She had never shown anyone her work before, the app she had been building in secret for months. It wasn't much yet, just a prototype, but it was her dream, a marketplace where rural artisans could sell their handmade goods directly to buyers, bypassing middlemen and getting the money they deserved. Jabari, curious after noticing her late-night tutorials, had asked her to show him. Zuri's hands shook as she opened the app on her phone. I don't know if it's good," she muttered, avoiding his eyes. "It's just something I've been trying." Jabari leaned in, genuinely interested, his eyes scanning every detail. He tapped through the screens, looked at the interface, and read the notes she had written for herself. This is incredible," he said finally. His voice carried real amazement, not the polite words he used before. "You designed this?" Zuri's face turned bright red. "Why yes, but it's not finished and I'm not. I don't know if it will work." She felt small, like a child showing a drawing to someone important. Jabari shook his head, smiling. "No, you don't understand. This isn't just good, it's brilliant. You've created something that can change lives. Real lives. I've never seen anyone in this house, anyone think like this." Her heart raced. She wanted to look away, to hide her face, but the pride in his voice made her lift her head. She had worked so long in silence, believing no one would ever notice. And here he was, seeing it all. "I can help," Jabari said after a moment. "I know some people who can polish the design, maybe help with funding, and we can make this bigger than you imagined. Bigger than this city, even." Zuri's hands trembled as hope began to bloom. She had dreamed of helping her grandmother, of giving artisans a better life, but she had never dared to imagine investors, funding, a real business. You'd help me," she whispered, almost afraid it was too good to be true. Jabari nodded, his eyes steady and encouraging. "I believe in you. I see what they didn't. And I'm going to make sure the world sees it too." Over the next few days, he quietly arranged meetings with potential investors, coached her on presenting her ideas, and gave her advice on polishing the app. Zuri stayed up late, working tirelessly, her mind buzzing with possibilities she had never dared to consider. Every line of code, every detail she added now felt like a step toward freedom, toward proving to herself and the world that she was more than anyone had ever imagined. For the first time, Zuri felt the weight of her dreams shifting. They were no longer hidden. They were real. And with Jabari by her side, she began to believe they could actually happen. The dining room was filled with the aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread. The Camway family had gathered for their usual Sunday dinner, the table shining under the crystal chandelier. Zuri quietly placed the last dish on the table, her hands trembling slightly. She had learned to keep her head down around Nyasha and Kilo, who were still watching her with thinly veiled annoyance. But tonight was different. Jabari cleared his throat, standing at the head of the table. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that made everyone sit up straight. "There's something I want to announce," he said, locking eyes with each family member. "Zuri's app, the marketplace she's been working on, has received funding, full funding, from investors in the city and abroad." The room froze. The Camway parents blinked in shock. Their mouths opened and closed, as if the words had been a slap across their faces. Mr. Camway's fork trembled in his hand, and Mrs. Camway pushed back from the table, speechless. Nyasha and Kilo's faces went pale. They had spent months mocking Zuri, calling her clumsy, a village girl, unworthy of even basic respect. And now, the person they had humiliated in front of guests, in front of the whole household, was standing on the brink of success. Zuri herself felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. She kept her eyes on the table, trying to hide the smile threatening to break across her face. The humiliation she had endured, the cruel whispers, the endless chores, all of it had led her here. And now, for the first time, the Camway family had to see her differently. Jabari continued, his voice steady. This is more than just an app. It's a platform that can help thousands of artisans in rural areas sell their work and earn a living. Zuri designed it, built it, and now it's ready to make a real impact. Mr. Camway opened his mouth, but no words came. Mrs. Camway's hands shook as she clasped them together. Nyasha and Kilo could only exchange embarrassed glances, their cruel laughter from months ago replaced by silence. Zuri finally lifted her head, meeting Jabari's encouraging gaze. She felt a rush of confidence. 4 years, she had been invisible in this house, treated like she didn't matter. But now she was seen. Not as a maid, not as someone to mock. She was an entrepreneur, someone whose work had value, whose ideas were worthy, whose dreams were finally being recognized. And as the family sat in stunned silence, Zuri realized something powerful. The very people who had tried to break her were now forced to watch her rise. For the first time, she felt the sweet taste of victory, quiet but undeniable. Tonight she wasn't just surviving, she was winning. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Camway mansion as Zuri stood in her small room, folding the few clothes she owned into her worn bag. Her hands moved slowly, almost ceremoniously, as if each fold was a quiet declaration of independence. She wasn't leaving because she had been forced out. She was leaving because she could, because she had finally earned the right to choose her own path. Every corner of the mansion held memories of the last months. Long hours scrubbing floors, whispered insults, stolen meals, and cruel laughter. She had endured it all, swallowed her tears, and kept going. And now, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was walking away with her head held high, carrying the strength and pride she had built in secret. Jabari entered quietly, his presence calm but firm. He watched her for a moment, noting the determination in her eyes. "You're leaving?" he asked, though he didn't sound surprised. Zuri nodded. "Yes, I've realized. I don't need their approval. I don't need to stay here to prove anything. I have my own work, my own future." Jabari smiled, a mix of pride and respect in his eyes. He stepped closer and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Zuri," he said, his voice steady, "you were never the servant here. They just couldn't see your worth. But I did. And I always will." Her heart warmed at his words. For so long she had been invisible, treated like she was nothing, but Jabari's faith in her had been a lifeline. Now, it wasn't just hope she was carrying in that small bag. It was the proof that she could rise above cruelty, above judgment, above everything that had tried to hold her back. Zuri straightened her back and took a deep breath. The mansion that had once felt like a cage now felt like a stepping stone. She walked down the grand staircase, each step lighter than the last, the sound of her shoes echoing with newfound confidence. The Camway family watched her go, silent and speechless, realizing too late that the girl they had mocked was leaving stronger than any of them had imagined. As she reached the front gate, she paused and turned back for a brief moment. Jabari stood a few steps behind, giving her a reassuring nod. Zuri smiled, a smile filled with triumph and freedom. She didn't look back again. Outside the gates, the world felt wide and full of possibilities. Every insult, every cruelty, every stolen meal had led her here, to a place where she could finally walk in dignity, on her own terms. And as she stepped into the bright morning, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Months had passed since Zuri walked out of the Camway compound, and life in Kasiwa City was nothing like the one she had left behind. She had rented a small office, started her tech hub, and slowly built a team of talented young developers. Her app, the marketplace for rural artisans, had grown faster than she had ever imagined. Orders from across the country poured in, and soon international buyers were reaching out, eager to support the artisans she had worked so hard to help. Every morning, Zuri walked into her office with a sense of purpose she had never known at the mansion. The girl who once scrubbed floors before sunrise was now leading meetings, presenting to investors, and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She smiled at the thought of how far she had come, from a village girl nobody took seriously to an entrepreneur making real change. And through it all, Jabari was by her side, not as someone to protect her but as a partner in every sense. He offered advice, celebrated victories, and even laughed at the small mistakes that came with growing a business. Their bond had deepened, evolving from trust to friendship, and something tender that neither of them had expected. Occasionally, when she thought of the Camway mansion, Zuri felt a quiet satisfaction. The sisters who mocked her, the parents who ignored her, they had no idea what they had lost. But she didn't need revenge. Her success was proof enough. She had turned cruelty into fuel, humiliation into strength, and dreams into reality. One evening, as the city lights sparkled outside her office window, Zuri looked at Jabari and smiled. "We did it," she said softly. He grinned back. "You did it. I just helped a little." Zuri laughed, thinking of the long journey that had brought her here. She turned to her laptop, reading messages from artisans whose lives were changing because of her work. She whispered a line she knew would stay with her forever. "They treated me like a servant, but the heir saw what I truly was, unstoppable." And in that moment, Zuri knew that nothing could ever take that away. Her worth, her dreams, and the life she had built with her own hands.